Work session of the Portland City Council. Today's date is April 12th. The subject is the Local Public Safety Coordinating Committee. And colleagues, since I can't see anybody, I've got a bit of a technical glitch today. I'll go ahead and turn the gavel over to Commissioner Rubio. Commissioner Rubio, since it's a work session, all you have to do is remember at the very end of the meeting to gavel out. So thank you for stepping into that role. And with this, I believe I'll turn this over to Commissioner Hardesty. I believe this is your work session.
That is correct, Mayor. Thank you so much. And thank you, Council President Rubio. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We are here today for this work session on the Justice Reinvestment Program that I have had the privilege of working with. Let me start by saying the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council is a statutory body that was created in collaboration and is made up of all the community safety partners within Multnomah County. The council is currently co-chaired by myself and Chair Deborah Kafori. We have been working, let me just say, a year and a half ago, Chair Kafori and I had a conversation about this incredible Transforming Justice project. And I remember clearly saying to Chair Kafori, is this just going to be a bunch of meetings, or are we actually going to do something? And she said, I am committed to doing something. And so I was honored to join her as the co-chair of the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council to help move this work forward. I want to say I appreciate greatly this collaboration with Chair Kafori, and she was absolutely as tenacious as I was to make sure that this did not just become another effort that we gathered information and put on a shelf. And so I wanted to take this opportunity, and I thank everyone who's joining us today. I wanted to take this opportunity to first say thank you to Chair Kafori, and thank you to the entire Lip Sync committee, because people have been vested, not just elected officials, not just grassroots community members, but our entire community safety system has been invested in ways that I have not seen for the 30 years I've been working on these issues. And so I want today for you, my colleagues, to hear about the great work that's happened over the last year and where we're headed. And we have an incredible panel today that will be sharing that information. I will turn it over in a minute to Chair Kafori for her to provide us some opening remarks. Then we'll hear from Abby Stamp, and then we'll hear from a couple of other incredible individuals who have actually helped us get to where we are. Barbara and Raphael. So at this moment, I just want to say thank you, colleagues, for being here. We as the city, as we're getting into our budget process, what a great time for us to kind of step back and look at our whole system and collectively have a vision for where we're headed. And so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Kafori for her opening comments. And I already know that Chair Kafori will have to leave at 10. And so it won't be, I understand totally. We have busy lives, but I'm grateful that you were able to be here this morning. Chair Kafori, please.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. Yes, we have our own board briefing this morning, so I will need to leave. But I am really excited to be here this morning. I'm Deborah Kafori. I'm your Multnomah County Chair, and I want to thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, and I want to thank the City Council members for the chance to discuss our Transforming Justice effort. The seeds of our Transforming Justice began in early 2020 when the local Public Safety Coordinating Council, or LPSCC, hosted the What Works in Public Safety Conference. During that day-long gathering, we heard from experts on restorative justice, survivors of crime, victim advocates, and specialists in the intersection of behavioral health and public safety. The momentum of the day carried us to a joint committee to create a new vision of public safety grounded in the fundamental redesigning of the criminal legal system. And yes, as Commissioner Hardesty said, she was a wee bit hesitant about moving forward. And she said, I'm not going to be involved unless we're going to do something. And we all agreed we are going to do something. And while the pandemic led us to a brief pause, we never took our eyes off the long-term goal of creating a public safety system that is rooted in equity and restorative justice, that acknowledges past harms, that expands supportive services, and allows law enforcement to focus on serious crimes. Over the last year, we've engaged people across our entire community, including those with lived experience in the criminal justice system, people experiencing homelessness, those living with a behavioral health diagnosis, as well as treatment agencies, system partners, reform advocates, and even elected officials. Many of the themes that you'll hear today sound familiar, like the need for alternatives to law enforcement interventions and more behavioral health services. And while the themes may not be new and unique, this moment is new and unique. This moment is a chance for us to transform systems in a way that recognizes the humanity and dignity of every person in our community. And this is a chance for us to carry that momentum forward. I want to thank all of our partners at the city for engaging in this process, including Commissioner Rubio, Community Safety Transition Director Mike Myers, Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle, and PPB Commander Tina Jones. And most importantly, I want to thank my co-chair on LPSCC, Commissioner Hardesty. It has really been crucial having your partnership in this work. You're a champion, a true champion for keeping community and racial equity front and center in this effort. Thank you so much.
And I will now turn it over to Abby Stamp. Abby Stamp is the Executive Director. Is that the right title, Abby?
It is.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Oh, good morning.
I tend to promote people when I introduce them. So I was just checking. Abby, it's all yours. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Chair Kafori. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. It's great to be here. Thank you, Commissioner, for making this happen on such short notice. It's been fantastic. This is a drum we've been beating for a long time, and I'm glad to be beating it here with you this morning. So how this is going to play out is I have some background and grounding comments to really give just a brief summary of the work that's happened over the past couple of years. And then actually what the Commissioner requested is an overview of the slide deck that we just presented to the steering committee of the Transforming Justice Project on Friday. So it will really give you a flavor of how the project feels and how we've been able to get to this space so far. So what I want to share with you is that this project, Transforming Justice, is really our effort to create a fully implementable vision for the future of justice policy. And this was actually born from my participation in the executive session on the future of justice policy, which was part of the Square One project at Columbia University. And I began that work back in 2018. And what I learned at that table is that there's a world of criminal justice thinkers and reform discussion that's deeply embedded in science and research and really focused on what could be. It's inspirational and it's aspirational, but it is not practical. So Transforming Justice is our attempt to bring this blue sky thinking really down to the ground. And a major theme that resulted from those sessions at Columbia is about reckoning. So in the criminal legal system, people who have harmed others really should reckon with the pain that they caused. And as leaders of the criminal legal system, we must reckon with the harm we have caused defendants, victims, and in particular, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And a reckoning process is much more than an acknowledgement of harm. It's also about creating and committing to permanent change. Transforming justice is our first real attempt to reckon for centuries-old oppressive criminal legal systems and practices and the inadequately resourced housing and health interventions for people in acute need. The systems we want to impact are centuries old, struggle significantly with inertia, and continue to learn how to lift up community voice is also very, very hard to do. While those of us here did not create these inadequate and oppressive systems, it's our privilege to fix them. So as Chair Kafoury noted, we did launch this project back at the What Works in Public Safety Conference, which feels like the before times, in January of 2020. And there we acknowledged some key flaws in the way public safety systems work or don't work. And when I say public safety, I'm referring to criminal legal systems and all of the other public systems that support people in need and in crisis, which is our responsibility as government stewards. Some of the harm is that we put people in a box. Either you're a victim or you're an offender. And that binary thinking does not take into the complexity of the human condition, human behavior, and really honoring and the acknowledgement that hurt people do tend to hurt people. And that the criminal justice system is not the answer. Behavioral health and housing system partners are woefully underfunded and resourced to deal with the struggles our community faces. We're seeing that every day. And the inequity is baked into systems, and solutions must be both innovative and intentional. So in addition to the information we're going to present today, the project just had a few key groups and players I want to call out and share for background so you know who's been involved and how we've come to the work we're about to walk through today. Our goal was first to bring together impacted stakeholders in a human-centered design approach, and that is different for government. As Commissioner Hardesty and Chair Kafoury mentioned, I had the same experience of lots and lots of talking and planning, and actually I purged this office before going to work from home for a couple of years, and I found 3 strategic plans that I hadn't unearthed from a very long time ago. And we're really good at planning, but we need to figure out how to do. And this process has felt different to get us to the doing. So that is human-centered design and using visual thinking, really different for us public types. And what the human-centered design approach really values is that the people closest to the problem are also closest to the solutions. So you'll hear that we have a steering committee, and Commissioner Hardesty and Chair Kafoury helped build that out. That's about 45 people, and Commissioner Rubio attends that as well. It is a mix of elected leaders, criminal legal system leaders, community members, behavioral health and other providers, activist community, disability community, and a whole variety of voices. We also have a working group, and myself and Raphael Tamarki, thanks for coming to this, Raphael, and also back, Zulfagari Azar. The working group, we'll go through the membership in a bit, but it's a small group. We meet every Thursday for 90 minutes to really do the work and ensure that that work is well documented, communicated to the steering committee, who is steering, vetting, authorizing, sitting with, and moving forward these works. And I also want to make sure that I call out Territory, which is the organization that has shepherded us through this different type of process. And you'll notice when we open the slide deck, it's pretty nice, it's pretty. So they really trying to use visuals to help us work together differently to be our own best selves. And finally, the stakeholders. You'll hear about a discovery process we engaged in where we reached out to over 300 people who can either impact systems or are impacted by systems to really influence and lift up what our vision should look like. And we were able to engage with over 133 people, and just want to thank people for contributing their time and effort. And before anybody asks, yes, we made sure to reimburse the folks who contributed their time who weren't being paid through their daily wage. All right, so the slide deck we're about to launch presented to the committee on Friday, update on the work to date, including some preliminary themes. We will be doing some more iterative work together between the working group and the steering committee through the month of May, and hopefully having our final vision delivered by June 30th, which is our deadline. So if we could launch the slide deck, we'll get rolling. And apologies, I don't know if I should be sharing screen or if there is somebody else from the city side who's going to do that. I don't know the tech part.
Let's see, who is here with us today? Christina, are you going to launch? Can you give us a hand with the slide deck? Boom.
And there it is. Great. So some of these slides are really just pertinent to the meeting we had Friday, but we're just going to touch on them very, very briefly. So what happens when we come into these steering committee meetings, the lead strategist is always playing music, and it's usually Pink Martini or something lovely local, and just gives you a moment to kind of click join in the Zoom meeting, and then you're joined with just some like people hanging out and listening to some good music and trying to connect and talking about what are some of our highlights in the county or in the city. So next slide, please. And I want to highlight for you this beautiful image, which really tries to capture a Venn diagram of partnership of all of the impacted communities. And actually, there are many more circles now, but really leading to the places of how we can impact local law, budget, and policy to get us to the top of the mountain to achieve that vision. And remember, this started back in 2020 when the landscape on the federal level was very different. And so we wanted to figure out what were all of the local levers that we could impact. And really that looks like local policy, law, and budget. Next slide, please. And then our facilitators will do some orientation. Next slide. And present us with the purpose of the meeting. And what we did on Friday was have a conversation about the themes that start to emerge from the vision. So if you don't have a good quality vision, how do you know you've gotten there? If you ever do get there, and how do you know you veered away if you have some steps and obstacles along the way? And then they're very clear about objectives and time frame. The next slide is the agenda, please. Great. And then next slide is a summary of what the role is, just to make sure that the people in the meeting are really clear of what they're being asked of, about being all in, commitment to implementation, be informed, communicate, make recommendations, unlock and provide resources, and really continuing to talk and share information and educate about the process and continue to communicate. I have started to send out a weekly digest every Tuesday morning at 9, just went out 46 minutes ago. And it really is a bit of a digest about what's happening on the project, with always a reference to some good research about why we're doing it. So if anybody is interested and would like to be included, members of the public, members of folks present today, just let me know. We'll add you to a very large distribution list. Next slide, please. We've also visualized some shared commitments about giving grace to yourself and to others, active listening, adhering to the process, and making sure that we continue to be open, work on relationships, and really focus on being trusted, saying hard things and listening hard, and maintaining a level of curiosity and respect. Next slide. I will just highlight, like the chair mentioned, COVID be darned, we leaned in hard, and we were able to work with an organization that is very well skilled in remote meeting and facilitation. Granted, sometimes it would be really great to be in person, but we haven't had to. So they give good guidance about, lighting and camera and headphones, and really doing some tech support for folks. For example, we have a member of our steering committee who has visual impairments, so we want to make sure that he is fully engaged. We use all of the technical supports to make sure that he can participate just as fully as the rest. Next slide, please. We also make sure that we're being smart about how we use the chat function, because what we don't want to do is have two conversations happening, one in the meeting and then one in the chat. And so making sure that the chat guidance, sometimes, thank you, Commissioner, sometimes we turn it off, sometimes we keep it on, just depending on what we're looking for in the meeting, because we really want the conversation to stay focused so that we can engage as a group. Next slide. Here's what you've been waiting for, the work to date. Let's see how that really sets the tone, I think, of getting us to this different type of space. Next slide. We have 3 pillars. The 3 pillars are really the values that drive all of the pieces of this project that we've accomplished so far. So our goal is to have a fully realized vision that will lead to a strategic plan across the public safety systems that outlasts turnover and election cycles, that has 3 primary values. 1, leads with race and prioritizes interventions, policies, and budgeting for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. and communities. 2, focuses on shrinking the current legal system footprint while growing health, housing, treatment, and other service responses instead. And 3rd, increases restorative approaches that focus on healing, harm reduction, and restoration. And may I be so bold to assert that I think if you talk to anybody in the community about the challenges our public systems have, there is a lot of agreement about how to have value and how to maintain dignity. And these 3 pillars continue to be how we continue to guide our work together. Next slide. So this is where we are in the project. So about a year and a half ago, we did start planning group dynamics, creating group charters to ensure that we were going to be productive working together. We weren't going to just sit and talk at each other and walk away. We were really going to collaborate and connect. And then we spent a long time doing environmental research. And I want to highlight that pink 2 there had 2 pieces of research that was conducted. One was the discovery process I mentioned at the beginning, and that was 133 folks engaged through either survey, focus group, or one-on-one interview. And they were those engagements, the questions that were asked were really tenuously and tediously developed by the working group to make sure that the questions were really poignant and thoughtful and open-ended and really focused on vision and the possible future. And there were also some questions that were curated for different types of stakeholders. We worked with Street Roots to have their ambassador program go and interview 10 individuals who are experiencing homelessness today. And the questions we asked them at the additional ones were a little different than the ones that we asked during the focus group of the criminal legal system decision makers, making sure that the tone and topic was curated to the stakeholder group. And the other piece of the research that was completed was desktop research. There is an entire list on our website of all of the research that was conducted, of any current or somewhat recent reports, best practices, philosophical pieces, academics, all of the information, so that the qualitative researcher who we employed would take the outcome of the discovery locally and the desktop research and hold it up together to see if there was any discord or any disconnect there. And now we're visioning. And so through the end of May, we'll be working on firming up our vision language so that there is consensus and agreement. So we are working on a consensus model. And if everything goes really well, this final vision will be started in the implementation phase in the summertime. But that is a conversation for afterwards. Next slide, please. Okay, one more to go. Here's what's coming up. So I always want to remind people that this project is a pathway towards a North Star. And this project promises transformation. And then rather than tinkering one fiscal year or one biennium at a time and doing a law here or making a policy change there, it's really supposed to focus on transforming the way systems should work together and enhance work that is already underway. So it's a large-scale visioning process for the adult public safety system. We did some interviews with young people, and we know their impacts in schools and juvenile justice. But as someone who's been in this business for at least a few decades, I really wanted to make sure that we had clear sideboards and parameters so that the project was a little bit more compartmentalizable and tangible, and not just, all of a sudden talking about prenatal health and geriatric care. We wanted to be focused on the problems at hand. So the vision is supposed to provide value-based and directional guidance for broad and various stakeholders to apply to all of the places where we have local levers of control. And that the output of the project may require significant shifts in how many of the public systems work, but that is why we have housing, health, behavioral health, and legal systems all working together so that there is an understanding and buy-in as we move through the conversation. Next slide. I also want to highlight what the project is not. Don't want to step on toes or derail good work. There's all sorts of other positive things happening in the community. And I always want to highlight that this is not to replace any of that work or to subsume it, usurp it, but just to make sure that good work is happening. And all the good work that's happening is always pointed toward those 3 pillars. So it feels like there's a good value consensus in base there. This project is not designed to address immediate crises. I understand and acknowledge that the landscape of what we're dealing with today in the community was very different in January of 2020. Nonetheless, we still need to plan for having a better and more just future. Next slide, please. All right. So the last tidbits of this visioning piece before the implementation, which would have an entirely different timeline. We are in the thick of visioning sessions. The working group continues to meet weekly. The steering committee will meet twice next month to make sure that we are headed on the right direction where we can have consensus and be able to sign off ultimately by June 2022. Next slide. And we always pause to ask the steering committee if they have any questions or comments. Next slide. All right, work in progress. Now we're going to talk about the draft vision and core strategies. And I'm going to stop talking in a moment, I promise, and give some airtime to my colleagues, Raphael and Babak. And so next slide, but not yet. I got just a few more to get through. So we've got this visual to help describe how the work has really come to this place of having this draft vision. We made sure to have the folks with system experience, folks with personal experience and professional experience, and the research come together. And that really developed the discovery report that I already mentioned. And so that discovery research created initial themes for a vision. And just to remind folks, the discovery report is also available on our website if you want to read quotes that people contributed and really see where all the information came from. You can hear me say website lots and lots because we're trying to be incredibly transparent and seek as much feedback as possible. So the working group, we are currently in the process of using both the research themes and the initial vision themes to develop possible ideas for core strategies. So how we take the visionary thinking and really bring it to the ground with actually strategic ways of moving forward. We broke out into small subgroups to do that work. And it was incredibly productive, and I'll show you how that work is unfolding in just a moment. And then the working group is coming back together now to really vet one another's small working group and really see if there's duplication and group all the strategies by affinity and just make sure that we're all on the same page. So this is a circular and very organic process, and it will continue until the working group is aligned on the strategic interventions, the core strategies, and the vision, and that will happen through hopefully the next 4 meetings we have on the books, and then that is what will be presented to the steering committee in May. So what I'm first going to share is this robust process that we've gone through to get to these draft vision and core strategies. And then the members of the working group will talk a little bit more about what the vision themes are. So next slide. I just want to highlight my colleagues on the working group who's been at this. Come what may, we come together as often as we can. So big shout out to Babak, who's here today, Senior Policy Manager at Partnership for Safety and Justice. Sahan McKelvey is the Director of Restoration and Identification at Self-Enhancement. Sahan is our housing guru. Maggie Bennington Davis is the Chief Medical Officer at HealthShare Oregon. Adam Renand, Policy Advisor to the Chair Kafori. DeAndre Kenyon-Dewey is a Consumer Engagement Coordinator with the county's Behavioral Health Division. Aaron Knott's Policy Director for the District Attorney. Abby Stamp is me. Raphael Tamarki is a Policy Advisor also for Chair Kafori. Julie Dodge is the Interim Director of the Behavioral Health Division. And Tina Jones, Commander for the Portland Police Bureau at North Precinct. Next slide. So this is intentionally very small because it's all very draft and not ready to be fully consumed. But you'll see the decriminalized behavioral health needs in the back. What that image is are all of the quotes that came through the discovery process. And just because what you're going to hear is not what the 9 of us came up with. These are the voices of people in the community and the folks who were engaged in the discovery. And so you'll see all the little colorful stickies there. We read and reread and reflected and asked and commented so that we were really steeped in those voices to make sure that we were, they're our muse, right? Those are the folks whose perspectives we want to highlight. And remember, that's everybody from judges and the DA to individuals experiencing houselessness today. And providers, we talk to police, we talk to everybody. And then what emerged from the discovery were those 6 themes, which is start with humanity, empower communities to lead, evolve to a system of restoration. Those 6 across your screen there. And we made sure that we were really steeped in what people were saying about each of those themes. Next slide. And then we took these themes and started to create a vision, like, so what? So I envision a county where everyone is housed and safe, right? All of the things that we would vision. And it's a really hard way for a lot of us to think, because we immediately think about policy and strategy, not thinking about visional and how really to get out of our own way and think about how to do it in terms of big ideas. And how do you know you've been successful? You know, wake up in 2030, how would the world be different? And so you see we use these Mural, which is an online platform, and we use these stickies and contribute and ask each other and really try to kind of get into it and figure out how to really hone in on what the vision will be. Next slide. And now that some of the vision themes are starting to take place, we'll go through that in a minute. We've also been diving into strategy. You'll see all the purple and green and blue on the right. Each one of those rows across is a different possible strategy. We're ranking them on how they are pertinent or not pertinent to each possible theme, and then trying to figure out feasibility of implementation, and then also doing some affinity ranking to make sure that some affinity grouping, that if there's duplications, just to simplify it. But we really are getting into the weeds here. And in the next and last slide, we're taking each of the themes, which are the core strategies in the blue, and asking, what's the strategy? Who's it for? Who's going to do the work? Is it funding, law, or policy? What's the outcome? Metrics, timeline, just because we really want to start to build out some meat on this very bare skeleton right now. And it's really starting to come together. And so each of those strategies we've brainstormed has some possible meat on it. Needs a lot more work, but in the next month, it will be complete. Next slide. So then as our consultants go through this information, then we pause and ask the steering committee, what's resonating, what gives you pause, what's missing, just so that we can realign the work and make sure that we are being not only as transparent, but as really open and catching all of the information as possible to make sure that the work is quality. Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment here. And if I could have first Raphael, we do have a few slides to get through, so you can leave them up. And talk about what this experience has been like, what's been useful for you in your position, and then we'll have Babak share some of his thoughts and feelings, and then we'll share the emerging themes, and then stop the presentation part. Go ahead, Raph.
Thanks, Abby. This is the part where I just get open and sort of reflect on the process. Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Raphael Tamarki. I use he, him pronouns. I am a policy advisor to the chair of Multnomah County. I work on human services, community justice, youth programming, and public safety. And so, I work for government, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. I believe our social service system helps a lot of people, but it doesn't help everyone. That's clear. So there just never seems to be enough help available, and coordination between systems is often dysfunctional or non-existent. And I think that's because we focus on staying in our lane when it comes to services, or we just try to do a good job within our own sphere of influence, and our systems become siloed as a result. So this process, this iterative discovery process where we're building and refining and improving on this initiative, has offered me a lot of insight that I really otherwise wouldn't have been afforded. And for one, just recognizing how deeply interconnected the criminal legal system is with our safety net services, specifically housing and healthcare. When our social services fail, the weight of that burden falls on the criminal legal system, which is something I think I knew intuitively, but just having these robust conversations with stakeholders and system managers put that in really sharp focus. Secondly, this process has given me new colleagues, I'm gonna call them friends, in systems adjacent to the ones that I work in. And we've developed a real rapport over the last year. There's been no ego or hubris, and we've been honest in our answers to the problems that we see. And at times that's meant accepting responsibility for system failures, our missteps and our misgivings. And so, it's been a real reckoning for what we once called justice. And now we're tasked to build a better system together. And I think, finally, maybe just realizing how much the last 2 years have changed us. And I mean, like all of us, we're just not the same people we were before the pandemic. That extends to all of our clients and customers at the community level. We have people who, never accessed social services or assistance before, and now they depend on them. We have young people who are struggling with clinical anxiety and depression, and other young ones who have missed developmental stages and are in need of social and emotional support. And I don't want to see any of them fall into our criminal legal system. It's just been a long 2 years, and many have gone numb to the suffering around us. But I, for one, would rather feel the pain of this moment to make real change. And I think this strategic planning process really offers a path to that.
Thanks, Raf. Babak, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Abby. Thank you, Raphael, really setting the stage there. Appreciate it. And thank you, Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, for being here. My name is Babak Zulfagari Azar. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Senior Policy Manager at Partnership for Safety and Justice. And for a few years, really a decade before that, having worked with youth and families, really trying to bring that experience from community, from systems to the table, and also my own lived experience, having been arrested multiple times in my upbringing and having experienced this system firsthand with my own eyes. This process led really by Abby. Thank you for involving us. You know, I thought I knew a lot, having spent so much time working in the trenches, front lines, in community, and bringing so many different experts in the system, folks, not just who are experts within their lanes, right, like Raphael talked about, but folks with lived experience and folks who are, you know, community leaders. Hearing those stories and those experiences from so many different angles, and seeing how we can come together from all these different experiences to work towards one common goal, right? Towards healing, right? Towards humanization, right? Towards ending collateral consequences of the experiences, and really ultimately that North Star, community safety, right? Living in a city, in a state that, in a country that's safer, right? Where we're at peace, where we feel comfortable, right? Like these are like kind of just core human values, right? And so, you know, this process has given us that pathway to have hope that we can get there, because we're not anywhere near there right now, right? Just locally with like the violence, you know, what's happening in our community, what's happening around homelessness, and how important of an issue like it is to really wrap our heads around how we can really work with folks who aren't living with a roof over their heads, right? Who are living in the streets, and not treating them like they're bad or they're different or there's something wrong with them, right? Understanding that there are serious mental health or drug addiction needs that need to be addressed in a public health manner and not in a criminalization manner, right? And so, you know, bringing folks together has been a really powerful piece of this, and being able to challenge each other, right? Like, you know, Raphael said, like, egos aside, right? This is folks who are, again, working towards common goals here and are willing to challenge each other, push each other to see blind spots, right? And we're doing that in a way that's strengthening the vision and strengthening the strategies that we're developing, so that when we get to implementation, we can really execute this in a way that, again, like Abby said, outlasts elections. That isn't just like some flavor of the month. This is something that's going to last a lifetime, right? Forever. This is and that's the goal, right? So the other element here too is, thank you, Commissioner Harsley, action, right? Like the talk is what it's been. That's been the theme. Getting together. You know, I said flavor of the month. What are we going to do like next month, or like what's hot right now, right? And you know, all this talk around like transforming justice and equity and all that, right? Which 5-10 years ago, where we're talking about equity and transforming justice, right? Like, but these aren't flavors of the month. These aren't just the things that are sticking right now. There's very much meaning behind those core themes. And so I think that us coming together and doing this in a way where we can have accountability with ourselves and with the folks that we're building these relationships with, to say, look, we're not just talking about this, but we're going to do something about this, because that's what's going to make our community safer. That's what's going to give us an opportunity to be hopeful and improve the experience of people who live in our city and who live in our state. So I think that's kind of the overarching value and impact of this for me.
Great. Thanks to both of you. It is an honor to work with you both. Next slide. I'm going to summarize the themes And these are the themes for our vision. And then Raphael and Babak will give a little bit more depth to each of them. But remember, each of these themes is going to be built out with a whole set of core strategies with when can it be implemented and how do we need to pull the levers. So yeah, this is a lot of big thinking, but it will be presented with a lot of good meat. So we envision a county where the criminal legal system is smaller, focuses on relationships and healing, and is trauma informed. We envision a county where humans are treated like humans. We recognize and value the human condition, and restorative interventions are the norm. We envision a county where collateral consequences of criminal convictions are non-existent, so people can heal and thrive. We envision a county where the criminal legal system is equitable and just, racial and ethnic disparities and other disparities are eliminated. We envision a county where power has been given to communities because place-based solutions work the best. And finally, we envision a county where root causes are acknowledged and addressed, but the criminal legal system is not the tool used. Next slide, and I believe that is Babak, you first. No, Raphael, you're first.
Okay, I can take this. So again, this is a reflection of the work that we've done, not necessarily personal. I'm trying to carry up the year-plus long conversations and sort of flesh out this vision for a new system. So this first theme, the criminal legal system is smaller, focuses on relationships and healing, and is trauma-informed. Let me unpack that. Over the last year of conversation, interviews, focus groups, there's consensus that the criminal legal system is overburdened, and the punitive approach to reforming offenders just hasn't worked. And so this vision looks deeply at the culture of incarceration and suggests a move away from a custody model, which emphasizes, security, discipline, and order, and moves towards models of rehabilitation and reintegration that provides treatment for individuals in custody and encourages maintenance of the offender's ties to family and other relations as a method of reform, recognizing that the hope is that they'll eventually return to the community. And then the second area of focus that loomed large in this conversation was law enforcement and policing. The vast majority of participants agree that there will always be a need for emergency response, but currently, police are asked to respond to too many issues that often fall outside of their expertise or add to an unmanageable volume of calls. So it's like broken windows, burglaries, medical emergencies, noise disturbances, overdoses, mental health crises, domestic disputes, and gun violence. It's a lot. And frankly, it's everything. And so this vision develops multiple forms of emergency response with nimble, centralized coordination, each responding to smaller categories of situation with a focus on being community-centered.
Thanks, Raph. Next slide. So Babak, you've got the next two, and then Raphael will take us home.
Thank you. And yes, and now we're going to go much deeper now. Sharing my reflection earlier, a little bit more kind of surface level, and now really peeling back the layers to really talk about the second theme of humanity, right? Let's think about what humanity isn't. Think about our language and the systemic environment that we have that's designed and meant to treat people in the system as though they're beneath us, less of a human, like we are superior or better. It's an adversarial relationship in our system, right? It's very much us versus them. The language. We call people who have harmed someone else and who are incarcerated an inmate. They're a prisoner. They're an offender. They're a felon. They're a AIC, adult in custody, right? And they're oftentimes identified by a number, right? Prisoner number. We intentionally create this dichotomy, right? It serves as a catalyst for the dehumanization of people. We cage them. They're behind bars, right? And we systematically isolate folks, and thus we outcast them from community, right? Furthermore, think about this. If we treated everyone like they were your own child, like it was your mother, your father, your best friend, your neighbor, how would we be treating them if we looked at folks in that light, in those relationships, right? Think about it. Everyone who is incarcerated, who is involved in the system, is someone's loved one, right? They are someone's son. They are someone's daughter, right? They are someone's best friend. they're always going to be someone's neighbor, right? And so that kind of transforming the way we look at folks rather than offenders and felons and inmates, right? And thinking of them as someone's loved one, in and of itself, in our language, will change the relationship that we have with folks and thus how we treat them, right? In addition to that, in terms of humanization, a culture of helping and not hurting, healing, not harming. Right, let me say that again. A culture of helping, not hurting, and healing, not harming, right? This is at the root of restorative justice, repairing harm, centering the experience of the person who has been harmed, listening to them, their needs, what they need for support, not just using their experience as a means to a conviction. This transformative experience is what can also improve trust between community members and thus improve public safety outcomes, right? And especially in communities of color who don't trust reaching out to the police, right? And sharing their experiences, and just their experience just being used as a means to a conviction and never getting the services and the needs they need or being listened to, right? And so that addresses an inequity in the system as well. And finally, this all will lead to, when we uplift people on a trajectory towards thriving in their lives and identifying barriers to success, we're building relationships and creating a culture of restoration. This gets us to that ultimate goal of just improving our public safety and folks' hope and comfortability in our city, right? That culture of humanization. The next theme on the next slide is about collateral consequences, right? Contact with police, which is the first step to involvement in the system, right, has a domino effect that can lead to a lifelong sentence, right? How does that benefit public safety? How does it benefit our community for someone to have barrier after barrier after barrier when they came to us with barrier after barrier after barrier, right? Don't we want folks to be accountable for their actions and to be able to move forward with a fresh start? Do we put kids in timeout for life? No. The reason for the discipline is clear, and the time frame is intentional, right? A criminal record, parole and probation, fines and fees, right? These are all barriers to success in terms of housing, employment, mental health, and essentially it's an extension of, it's not just a person who's harmed somebody who's in prison, you're imprisoning the whole family, right? This has been an experience that's been very prevalent in my work in the community, is a kiddo or an adult who's on parole or probation, you're imprisoning the whole family. That experience has layers and layers of impact because of the terms and conditions of parole and probation, the money that is involved in someone being able to move forward, right? And so the key here too is if you have a setback while you're incarcerated, you're going to have more system, and when you have more system involvement, you're now a repeat offender, right? You move further down the sentencing grid stream, right? And so it's the hope here is that you have an experience with the criminal justice system that doesn't lead to further incarceration and going further downstream, right? Jail turns into, right? A treatment program turns into jail that turns into prison, right? And you're going through this revolving door the rest of your life, right? And so to be able to move forward and have a fresh start, it's in the best interest of community and public safety, is it not? Next slide, please.
Vision emerging theme 4, the criminal legal system is equitable and just. Racial and ethnic disparities and other disparities are eliminated. Yeah. In the discovery process, we heard overwhelmingly from stakeholders, partners, and practitioners that we need a system that is equitable and just, period. Full stop. The racial and ethnic disparities that existed before the pandemic have deepened and accelerated in nearly every aspect of our systems, from the criminal legal system to housing and healthcare. And so the takeaway from these conversations is that transformation towards equity should lead with race, because it's the most persistent and entrenched aspect of the disparities in the system. And still, we have to do that without ever looking away from the disparities that we see along sex, gender status, and orientation, just to name a few. Next slide. Power has been given to communities. Place-based solutions work the best. Yeah, through stakeholder engagement and review of academic research and evidence-based practices, this process discovered communities must center and lead efforts towards well-being and safety. There's a need to reorient the government as funder of the lion's share of safety net and social services away from paternalism and towards real empowerment of communities and partnerships with stakeholders. Each neighborhood and community experience a unique and wide range of needs and assets, and there's clear evidence that localized, place-based solutions are most effective when it comes to increasing public safety. Last slide there. Root causes are acknowledged and addressed, but the criminal legal system is not the tool that's used. There was broad acknowledgement also throughout the discovery process that the pandemic exacerbated many of the contributing factors to crime and violence in our communities. We have, for a long time, even before the pandemic, seen a concentration of crime and violence in communities with higher rates of poverty, lower median incomes, higher health disparities, higher eviction rates, and generally just less economic opportunities for residents. So when we talk about the work that addresses the root causes, we're talking about anti-poverty initiatives, emergency housing, trauma-informed therapy, drug treatment, school-based services, youth employment programs, hunger relief, and healthcare clinics. The need to get upstream was nearly unanimous, but there was also an acknowledgement that critical services for individuals and families in crisis often come too late, or they're only made available after someone has entered the criminal legal system. So this vision demands help for those in need well before they interact with the criminal legal system.
Okay. Thank you both. Next slide. We gave the steering committee some time to sit with that. And the incredible response of, I get it now. I understand how the vision is going to have strategies and how this is really uplifting and also hopeful, because it gives us a pathway to work together to move forward. Next slide. That was it. So we just summarized. We always ask folks to immediately complete a survey, but how'd you like the meeting? And then we signed off with a pretty little purple hand, I think, is the last slide. Yeah, was a thank you. Sorry, it's a black hand with purple text. So that's the end of the presentation today. Commissioner Hardesty, would you like us to discuss, take a break? What would you prefer?
Thank you so much. Could we take the screen down? You see all these beautiful faces. President Rubio, would you like us to take a quick break before we get into conversation? I'm seeing heads go up and down. So could we take a quick 10-minute break and then come back and get into a dialogue?
Let's do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay. So next is Q&A.
Yes, that is correct. I know we've thrown a lot of information at folks over the last hour. I see the mayor has his hands up.
All right.
Mayor?
Yeah, hopefully, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Can you hear
can.
me?
Yes.
Oh, good, great. Thanks for bearing with me on the phone. I apologize for that. So first of all, I want to thank everybody who presented. I think you made some really good points. The point that I think is the most important is the need to enhance social services. And I appreciated the comment that the one speaker made about the police being called upon to do a great myriad of social service activities that are not necessarily, they're not necessarily the best people to be doing that. And so I appreciate that very much. There is something else, though, that I'm trying to reconcile, and maybe somebody can help me do that. A few weeks ago, our district attorney wrote an op-ed in the Oregonian, and he described the criminal justice system as being on the verge of collapse. And this council has heard that we have a critical shortage of district attorneys. We have a critical shortage of public defenders. It's my understanding that we have 400 to 500 fewer jail beds in the Multnomah County correction system just since the time I was chair over 10 years ago. So that's a substantial reduction in the number of available jail beds. Of course, we have a critical shortage of police. So in many respects, we are already experiencing the smaller footprint of the criminal justice system. And from where I'm sitting, it is not serving anyone well. We are not seeing the public safer. We're not seeing a reduction in criminal activity. And frankly, we're not bringing people to any sense of justice, or as the speakers described it, a reconciliation with their actions. And so could somebody help reconcile the desire to shrink the footprint of the criminal justice system with the already greatly reduced criminal justice system that I believe is actually endangering public safety?
That's probably me. I'm happy to respond. Mayor Wheeler, it's Abby Stamp. And you are correct. There are crises in both the public defender side and the district attorney side in terms of staffing. But what we're not seeing is a build up and a growth of the housing service and behavioral health side that is an adequate replacement for people who are in crisis and causing challenges in the community. And really what, good change happens when those in power are able to acquiesce power in a typical way of intervening when there's a trusted alternative. And the behavioral health system is also in crisis. So we don't have that trusted alternative.
Right. So Abby, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The social services infrastructure is in crisis as well. We have a mental health system that is in a pervasive state of collapse. We do not have adequate substance abuse treatment programs in our community. We don't have a lot of the social services infrastructure that your vision requires. Mm-hmm. And so wouldn't it seem that the first step here is to build up the social services infrastructure before we reduce the footprint of the criminal justice system in order to keep the public safe?
So I'm happy to jump in as well, because I think that's an unfair question for you as just the leader of this effort. I don't mind you trying to answer it. But Mayor, I think we're talking about two different things. We're talking about, we've had a criminal justice system for 100 years that has failed miserably. And so whether we were arresting lots of people and putting them in jail for long times, the system itself has been built on a white supremacy model, and it impacts different people differently. And so this project was about looking at the system itself as it was at that moment, and then trying to imagine a system that would be different, that would be more just, and would have more alternatives. So I hear what you're saying. When we started this process, we had not had a worldwide pandemic, a worldwide racial justice movement, wildfires, severe heat, and severe cold. But it doesn't mean that we should not be imagining what our criminal justice system looks like when it's transformed to do what it should do, which is to hold people accountable for their behavior, but not write people off because they've been involved in the system. And so I hope that helps. I just didn't want Abby to be the one trying to answer that. I see Raphael also has some comments for this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that as a long-term vision, but the work session started with this is going to be an action plan. And I guess my question is then what is your proposed set of actions? And my hope is it would not be to further stress a criminal justice system that is already, as the district attorney says, and I agree with him, it's already on the verge of collapse.
And the goal is for us to do both, to address the immediate crises that we have and to build towards a more just, more fair, and more transparent system.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to jump in briefly. This is Raphael. It's not an either or proposition. You know, I got a brother who's a detective in the Bronx, and I have these conversations with all the time. I'm in human services. He's a cop. Both systems are failing. And in fact, those system failures are informing one another. So, you know, when we talk about the siloed work or the creating the lanes, this is part of the problem. We're both hurrying up to wait for the other to pull it together. And that's actually what this approach is actually, I think, the antidote to that. You know, we need to work to sort of develop systems that are interlocked and recognize the weight that each carries. So I don't have a sort of a list of things that we need to do in the next 6 months, but understand that this is just a discovery process. This is us to lay the foundation for us to develop those conversations, those plans.
Commissioner Mouse and
Thank you.
Commissioner
I
Ryan.
appreciate that response.
Thank you. Well, first, thanks to everyone who presented today, and thanks to LPSCC for engaging in this very important work. I think there are a lot of exciting ideas here, and there's some that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, so I'd appreciate your help with that. Abby, I probably have 3 or 4 questions, and I'll start out with Abby. In your presentation, you mentioned that LPSCC had assembled research that helped inform your thinking, and that was on your website. I was looking at your website and I can't see that. Could some staff drop the link to the research that you're pointing us to in the chat? That would be helpful for me. And in the meantime, one of the things I'm curious about is, as you've gone about your work, if you've looked at actual crime data for Multnomah County and how that informed your work, if you did take a look at actual crime data, what are you seeing out there, and how does your work products reflect what we're seeing in Portland and surrounding areas?
Commissioner, I believe that is the question for me.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Commander Jones is part of our working group. Chief Lavelle and Chief Goldberg from Gresham and Sheriff Reeves are all involved in the project. And so what we're hoping is that folks bring their wisdom and their experience and what they know into our meetings and into our processes. But I want to just remind all of us here today, and thank you for Raphael and Commissioner Hardesty for saying this in response to the mayor's good questions, is that this is about a vision, and we're still really focused on the vision and not yet in a place of having enough details about quantifying problems and quantifying solutions. We're still just trying to stay in a solution-focused, forward-thinking space, and then start to work backwards so that we can get to that place of having core, concrete strategies that we can build out, and that is the work that's happening over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And I dropped the information in the chat, Commissioner.
Great, thank you for that link. I appreciate it. So would you say your vision is data-driven?
Depends on what kind of data. Yes, it is. If you look at the desktop research, there are many professional and academic resources that we cited, in addition to really uplifting the data that was drawn out of our stakeholders through qualitative research and making sure that we are listening to and responding to what members of our community are asking for in order to figure out how to integrate both quantitative and qualitative approaches to making sure our vision has all of that information baked into it.
Raphael, is your hand up because you want to respond here?
It is. I want to help out my colleague because, again, we're all working in different fields here. But let me just sort of give a practical example of sort of how we use data. I work largely in gun violence, and I think what we've seen during the pandemic is we're seeing new paradigms emerge. I think a lot of the things that we try to do to prevent and intervene with gun violence have frankly changed. There's no predicting locations like we may have been able to in the past, though we certainly see trends. And frankly, the violence we're seeing is not all the same. Though we label it as gun violence, domestic gun violence is very different than drug deals gone wrong. It's very different than group violence. And so what we've been able to do is really parse out some of these problems and sort of try to figure out that that varied multiple emergency response through this conversation. Who would take this situation? Who would look at the data that we're seeing here? You know, it's easy to sort of point at clusters, but those clusters are changing so quickly that we can't build a system quick enough to sort of address it. We need to be much more nimble and flexible. And I would defer to law enforcement to talk about sort of the back end of how we deal with gun violence. But on the prevention side, we know a lot of what we can do. And, you know, we can go through that list, and I mentioned some of it, but I think, again, this is the pre-work to where we want to build these new systems that are interlocking.
Okay, thank you for that. And can we pull up the slideshow and maybe go to slide 11?
I'm sorry, which slide?
11. Great, thank you. I appreciate all these goals here. I did have questions about outcome number 2. First is a terminology question. Throughout this presentation, you talk about the criminal legal system. Earlier, the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty got into a conversation about the criminal justice system. I'm not sure if I know what a criminal legal system is. What specific programs or bureaus are we talking about here in the context of Portland?
The criminal legal system, Commissioner, refers to the typical criminal intervention, which results in prosecution and incarceration of individuals who were either alleged to or convicted of committing some law violation as prescribed in the Oregon Criminal Code.
Okay, so
police, DAs, prosecutors, right? The sheriffs, everybody that's in that system,
including probation. Yes,
including probation.
Probation. Okay. Well, then this does kind of take me back to some questions that the mayor was asking. Like, can you flesh out for me some more the intuition around shrinking the police, the DA, jail, at a time, you know, here's why I ask. I'm the guy in charge of 911. Our 911 calls have gone up 30% in the last 2 years. We answer more than 500,000 911 calls. Our vandalism calls in the last 2 years have doubled. Homicides are up 5-fold over the past 6 years. In 2021, vehicle thefts hit a new record. I'm looking at a headline on the screen over here that says the Multnomah County DA's office overwhelmed with heavy workload. That's just from March of 2022. And I can tell you, I'm sitting on this council, the only way I can keep BOIC operating and the only way that we can keep the police bureau open is by forcing people to work overtime. And so I'm just trying to see I'm not quite getting how we reconcile shrinking the DA, the police bureau, probation and whatnot, given the sort of realities that, you know, I have to face every day when I go to work.
Do you mind if I jump in on that?
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Rose. And so, you know, okay, yeah, I'm off mute. Thank you. So basically, you know, with this, in terms of shrinking the current legal system footprint, the criminal legal system footprint, it's focusing on how the criminal legal system isn't an answer to any of the issues that are leading to someone having contact with the police, or being in a courtroom and being prosecuted, or being incarcerated, right? Like, that doesn't resolve the issue that led the root causes. It doesn't address root causes, right? The focus is by shrinking the criminal legal system and growing the health, housing, and treatment responses, that you're actually getting to the root issues, right? That will both lead in an intervention to a better outcome for someone who's both hurt someone and for someone who's been hurt, right? So that it doesn't happen again. You're improving the chances of that. But then by growing these other systems and investing in them, we're focusing on prevention, right? So that someone doesn't come into contact with the police, right? Or isn't prosecuted or isn't incarcerated or isn't on parole and probation, right? And so by improving the other systems like health and housing and treatment that can help prevent a crime from happening in the first place by getting at root causes, you're shrinking the reliance of policing and prosecution and imprisonment, right? And then by not focusing on the other end in terms of the intervention, someone's, had a law violation, they need to be incarcerated or on parole and probation. You're also culturally looking at it differently, right? Because that's not an answer, right? It's further exacerbating the issues that led to that person having contact with the police or being prosecuted or in prison. And that's not to say that this project isn't saying someone shouldn't be incarcerated, right? It's a case-by-case individualized experience rather than what we've been doing for a century, which is just focusing on incarceration and over reliance on incarceration that disproportionately impacts people of color and doesn't really get at the root needs of folks who've been harmed, right? And so that's the transformation. That's the huge change because, in this country, that's what we're used to, right? We incarcerate more people in the United States than any other place in the world. Why are we not the safest country in the world? Why for 6 years has there been more homicides and violence? Why are we not safer if prosecution, right? If policing, if parole and probation, if all those things were equal and the same, right? Why is the state, why is the city, why is the country not getting safer and safer and safer, right? And so, we have a fairly high recidivism rate, not just in the United States, but in Oregon as well, for folks who are reoffending. Why, if someone's going through our current system, do they not come out and not offend again? Why is there such a high recidivism rate, right? So these are all layers of the criminal justice system that by design are broken because it's meant to keep people coming back and to make their lives more difficult, right? There's a lot of layers to that as well that I don't want to get us too far into a tangent on. It is important. As Abby said, the foundation of the criminal justice system is white supremacy. We didn't have our first prison boom in the United States until after the 13th Amendment was passed, right? We abolished slavery except as a form of punishment for crime, right? And then in the 60s and 70s, we had our second prison boom right after the civil rights movement, right? That's not an accident, right? And so, looking at shrinking the current criminal legal system footprint, there's the two ends. Stop the over-reliance of incarceration as a solution to crime, but then also investing and focusing on the other root causes and the systems that are involved in those root causes of crime so that we're preventing crime in the first place.
Thank you for that. Excuse me, Commissioner Mabs, I wanted to add a little bit to that answer for you. Sure. When I think about over 50% of the arrests prior to COVID were people, but for being houseless, would have never been arrested on charges of poverty, right? Trespassing, loitering, public urination, et cetera, et cetera. When you think about 50% of the calls to date in 911 are for unwanted people. That a law enforcement response to an unwanted person is not always the best first responder for that kind of incident, right? So what we're trying to do in this project is to have a vision for where we're going, not where we are. And where we are is in crises in all these systems, right? But if we don't know where we're headed, then we're going to keep doing failed policies and actions that will continue to create the same kind of outcomes we've always gotten. And so I really appreciate your question. I know for many of you, this is the first time that to jump in. And I'm excited by the intensity of this conversation, because that means that just like the steering committee with the local public safety coordinating council, this city council is also leaning into this question. It is one of the hardest questions we have to answer as a council. And I am really grateful for this conversation. So I just wanted to add that piece from the city side so that we're having a fuller conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for that clarification. And I'll just ask one more question and let my colleagues get in here. Just a clarification from Babbitt, or Babbitt. I'm sorry. I appreciate your historical perspective on the history of prisons in the United States. I'm a little bit of an historian too. But is it your claim that right now in Multnomah County that we are over-relying on incarceration? Is that your assessment right now?
We've had changes since the pandemic, right, in terms of reducing our reliance on incarceration, right? That's a fact.
Yeah.
But it was driven by the pandemic, right? It wasn't driven by us having a realization that, right, we're over relying on incarceration.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's great. That's sort of an experiment in nature. We're relying less on incarceration than we were in the past, which is the direction that we want to be going in. Do you have any evaluation on how well that's going? Is this the future that we want?
How well what's going?
We're trying to move towards less incarceration. Thanks to COVID, we've actually done that, which seems like we've taken an important step towards one of the goals that you're trying to move us towards. I'm just trying to get a sense in your evaluation or in LPSCC's evaluation if the way the system is working now with incarceration in Portland has improved public safety or any particular outcome that we're paying attention to.
Yeah, it's my understanding that since the pandemic, if you look at folks who've been incarcerated, that reoffending and recidivism, and this is anecdotally, I would want to see the data to tell me more of a story about this, but that recidivism's actually down. We're not seeing an increase in the specific crimes that folks. So these are lower level offenses, right? Sure. We know homicides are at record numbers since the 90s, right? And we've thought about strategies to addressing it, right? Like the focus intervention teams, our policing and our strategy around policing is adjusting to what's happening in the community, right? Yeah. And so, that's a plus. But for low level offenses, for, Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, and I failed to mention before, pre-pandemic, again, half of the arrests in Portland were for folks who were houseless, right? So these by not focusing on low level offenses and focusing on the crimes that do the most harm, that have the biggest impact, I think that strategy has led, influenced by the pandemic, to success in terms of not having folks who need to have services in the community where they're from, as opposed to being incarcerated and not getting services that will help them in the future.
Okay. Can you? I promise this will be my last question for a little bit. So help me out with this. This is a real world situation that I am dealing with right now. I suspect all of my colleagues are dealing with also. What do I say to my constituents who reach out to my office because they are outraged that the police have arrested someone for a violent crime or a sex crime, and they are out of jail within a matter of hours? What do I say to the Portlander who is surprised and frankly horrified by that? Raphael, looks like you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate this line of questioning. I do. I don't have an answer for you to what you say because, as you already acknowledged, the system is in crisis. That shouldn't happen. Right. I think we have due process. And, I think what this larger project is saying is, can we imagine the future where we're actually having less people go through the system? And I for one, don't believe that this is how we want to live, with broken systems, with crime and difficult to address social issues. And I think fundamentally what we're saying here is, yes, we need to address the volume, and there is no, frankly, politically expedient solution right now. It took us a long time to get into this situation. It's going to take us a long time to get out. What I do want to focus on is community well-being and resilience and all the things that we aren't going to put on the criminal legal system so that everybody gets a little bit of breathing room so we can create that better future. So yes, it's bad now. It is a sad and beautiful world. I agree with you. But that doesn't mean that we should feel despair in these systems. Quite the opposite. It's a time to actually have a firm upper lip to make some changes.
But thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone who helped answer my questions today. I'll be quiet and let my colleagues talk for a while.
Abby, did you have a response before we move on to Commissioner Ryan?
It would behoove me just very quickly to remind folks that we've been a MacArthur Foundation grantee since 2015, and we've received several $1 million. And our current project is working on our pretrial system to make sure it is more risk-based and more thoughtful. It is well underway, and we're hoping in the next 24 months that the complete revamping will be complete. So we know that our pretrial system was pretty shiny and new back like in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's high time that we make it better. So that work is underway as well. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Madam President. So could we, we could go back to the room, the gallery. Yay, makes it feel like we're all in a meeting again. So I want to start off by saying, overall, your inspiration, aspirations, the vision, Abby, which you've been very clear about, is really easy to get behind. So I want to recognize that you're at this phase. And some of our feedback and dialogue we're doing today, I know all of you are taking it in. And then we move into what I think government leaders fail at consistently, which is, we know how to do proclamations and vision and even policy, but my God, sometimes it's really difficult to get into planning and implementation. So, there'll be more, and I think every meeting should have dialogue that has some tension, or I don't believe you're having a good meeting. So, so thank you for your good work, and thank you for entertaining this dialogue today. Now you think I'm just going to go really hard, but anyway, first then I want to say, yeah, bring it. So. I want to start off by saying, as someone that has family members and loved ones that have been locked up when they needed treatment, I get what you're saying. Totally. Like, I've lived that experience. And I think you've heard, if anyone pays attention, when I'm out doing my work, I'm constantly talking about mental health and behavioral health. And that's where our great state is failing miserably, just miserably. You compare us to the rest of the country, and it's quite embarrassing. And I do hope everyone's paying attention as we have dialogue with the gubernatorial race, because Oregon's got to get it together, and it impacts us on the local level. So I wrote down some notes. Let's see if they make any sense now. So that's where I wanted to start. B, I also want to appreciate that the system works. What did I write here? Oh, I like that you mentioned that you don't want to be focused on something that's going to be continually disrupted by election cycles. I just love that. And I love that because I was the CEO of All Hands Raised when we birthed it. We were well known nationally as a collective impact and continuous improvement organization. And one of our visions when we were building the system in 2010 was to be that place that education advocates and activists could come to the day after the election and be convened by us, so that we created a safe place where this type of dialogue would not be wrought with no demonization, but actually like real dialogue with tension and dealing with these challenging issues. So I hope that you keep that as a guiding light in your North Star constantly. And in that, the third point I want to make before I ask a couple suggestions, because I realize that when we ask questions, it's not like you all haven't talked about this before. So I'll always try to remember that. And then the third comment that I wanted to make is just how important that you talked about upstream. And I think we all know that's what you're getting at, is that as a society, we haven't done enough upstream investments. And we also know that every sector has this challenge. And I think everyone's lived experience has some merit behind that. I mean, for me, I know I wouldn't be alive today if I get hit by a car, if I get in a wreck and I need emergency surgery, I want Western medicine, I want the best surgeon, I want all of that quickly. But if I want to have long-term health, I need to do daily maintenance that's restorative. So that's my parallel to saying, yes, you need emergency responders like police. And to prevent the need for police, you need to do all this type of work and support that type of upstream work that goes into it. When I was in the schools and we looked at disproportionate discipline, it was, especially in the middle schools, the best thing that would happen is when we would look at data about looking at referrals to principals' offices and having it broken down by race and gender, and having predominantly the workforce was white women, and having them look at that data and be really uncomfortable with what we needed to talk about, which is, why is it that boys, especially boys of color, were going to the principal's office with the same incident type reports as females and white females? And it's like, let's just get honest. You have a comfort zone with another female, and you could figure out how to do your own restorative dialogue with them in a way that maybe you didn't feel comfortable with a student of color who was oftentimes a male. And when we had that type of dialogue, we started to see 6 months later the data improve immensely. But we had to give space, not to shame anyone, we had to give space for people to be in that dialogue. And I just hope we keep that in mind, that as we're building this, and I would give you one suggestion. When I liked, there was this, not that, what were they? Healing, not harming, was that one of them? Yeah, of course. Helping, not hurting. It's restoration, but not retaliation. So I just want to offer that. Like, we need more restorative dialogue and less retaliation, like everyone that's done work in the past is bad, and then now therefore we're smarter than everyone else, and this is how you need to do it. It doesn't work, is what I've found. So like allowing the room to have that type of discomfort and dialogue when you bring in people that might be from traditional law enforcement, if you will. That's just please consider that. And I give you that from my own experience as a facilitator, staying objective, because that's the number one thing a facilitator does, in my opinion. To stay focused on results, stay focused on the data, and then allow that uncomfortable, wonderful tension to occur. I always told my staff when they come back, oh, that meeting that was really intense, had a lot of tension, I'd be great. Then you had a good meeting. Because we all know Portland Nice has had a lot of nice meetings that haven't resulted in much. So now we'll go back to the composite of your group. I did notice this, and it seemed to be predominantly government. So if I was going to have you put up a slide, I noticed that this group is mostly government. I'd like you to consider, as you move forward and you build more composites of rooms that need to discuss this, that you consider people that aren't at the table. And that includes the private sector. That includes leaders in business that are often the ones that are making big decisions on how our revenue streams impact all of us. And if they keep threatening to leave, like they are, because of the dialogue you heard earlier with my colleagues, the mayor and Commissioner Mapps, we're in a crisis right now in terms of what people are experiencing in every neighborhood across the city. And I know that you know that. So I would just like you to consider how you could stretch in terms of who's included at the table. And if you want me to be helpful with that, I would be more than happy to. But you have capable people already on your committee with the fellow commissioners that are involved, both Commissioner Rubio and Commissioner Hardesty. So anyway, was that cool for a suggestion? Have you considered? Okay. And then I think I got to the other point, which would you consider restoration, not retaliation, as a theme as well to add to that? And then I think what both the mayor and Commissioner Mapps was mentioning was important. And what I got from all of you is that you're not dismissing the short term. And I definitely really did hear that from Raphael when you were speaking. It helped. And I knew you were from the Bronx, by the way. I lived in New York long enough to know that. But anyway, and when you brought up your brother, that was helpful. And I think it's so important that we keep telling those stories, that we can see that your brother as a police officer is doing the best they can. And they're doing a job that many people would not want to do. And they're serving their residents of that city with all their heart, and they're taking a risk every day to bring safety to that community. And so I think that it's helpful when we share those kind of stories as well. So we have to stop dividing when we do these dialogues. And so I just want to say that I would just would you consider bringing in the room some more knowledge that you're completely aware of what's happening today? I mean, I'm not the only one that lives on a block where just in 3 weeks we've had 2 gas tanks punctured. There's been, a catalytic converter was about a month ago, and there's someone, an RV now in the block. It's just like these things are hard for Portlanders right now, and we're all really uncomfortable with current conditions. And I think that we have to be. I hope you consider weaving that into your narrative, that because what I got from listening is that you're aware of that, but you're reminding us that this is about a vision and where we're going. And I just hope that as a city, as a county, as a state, we can really go hard on building these systems. So we have places we can take people to get true restoration, true recovery, as opposed to being locked up in cages, as I heard, where it's pretty difficult to ever really get the type of recovery that you need. So I just would say that I was missing that in your presentation, and so I wasn't surprised that my colleagues said that. And maybe there's a way to talk about the shrinkage in a different way. Like maybe it's less literal and it's more about how it's being reformed, that justice system. But right now, currently in Portland, we're in a lot of pain when it comes to those comments. And so I wouldn't want this to be derailed because of the current reality that many people are living in that also have a big place in their heart for what you're speaking to. I live in the world of and a lot. Makes me a really confusing politician. I realize that, but it's like we have to know that both of these things are true. And I just wanted to offer that. So I don't know if I think I was just offering you things to consider. If you want to say anything back to me, I'll take the questions. But yeah.
Did anyone have a response, Rafael?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say thank you. Honestly, this doesn't feel that contentious to me. Maybe because my family arguments are more heated than this, and I appreciate
it's because you're from a large family in the Bronx. Yes.
I mean, probably, that's probably.
And I'm from a large family too, so I love it. Let's do this.
I think part of this is also like, if we're serious about the work, we have to have these conversations in public. I don't feel threatened or attacked by this. I mean, we're working this out. I see the problems. You know what I mean? I think, again, you talk about the pain. I would rather be in excruciating pain than totally numb to the things that we have to do. That's why I signed up for this. And you bring up really good points. We talk about our public health approach, and that doesn't mean it just lives in a public health department, but that all of us have to start identifying risk factors and mitigating those risk factors for vulnerable populations. Because, and maybe this is a better way to talk about the footprint, our criminal legal system does not need any new customers. And so what do we do to walk back and stop that? Because frankly, the system can't take anybody else. And so this is what this conversation about transforming justice is. It's like, how can we get these people help before we just jam up this system again? And I get it. We're looking at the problems in front of us, which seem great and insurmountable, but not without looking past them to find a better place. So, that's why I showed up here today. And I really appreciate the conversation. I feel a part of the solution.
Commissioner Hardesty, then Abby.
Thank you, Commissioner Maps and Commissioner Ryan, for your questions. And Commissioner Ryan, I just want to say that there have been so many research reports and so many studies done over the last couple of decades to tell us what was wrong with our criminal justice system. In fact, I remember, I think it was the Portland Tribune that did a series of articles, and one of the headlines still stays embedded in my brain: the cost of being Black in Multnomah County. And that article showed that every step of the criminal justice system, if you're Black, the consequences is more severe every step of the way, from the police officer on the street to the judge on the bench. So we already know that our systems of criminal justice are inequitable. They've always been inequitable, and not talking about the inequitability of our system, the inequity in our systems, doesn't fix it, right? And so I appreciate the fact that for a year and a half, we've been really intentionally focused on what's broken and what a new vision of a criminal justice system must look like. We could do everything we want to do with policing in the city of Portland, but if it's not connected to the DA, it's not connected to the sheriff, it's not connected to the Multnomah County courts, then we are not making any changes at all. The whole system needs to be changed and transformed in a way that actually creates justice. And no one can, with a straight face, look at our system today and say that it is a justice-based system. It is not. And so what I want to make sure that my city council colleagues know is that, yeah, this is the kind of conversation that we're having, and we're not having it without police in the room, without sheriffs in the room, without the DAs in the room, without the courts in the room. So this is the first time we as a city council have been able to have this conversation, but I want to assure each of you that we are not pretending that those entities don't exist. They are intimately engaged in this work, and they all know that their systems are broken. So we're not telling them anything they don't already know. But what I love is that they're all committed to a new vision of what's possible and what the North Star could look like, right? Will we be there today? Nope. 5 years from now, probably not. But if we're not planning for that new system today, we will never get there. And that's what this work is about. It's about what is it as a community we value? And do we value all the people in our community, or do we want to continue to just use our criminal justice system to remove people from sight, but not actually deal with the core issues that are impacting their life? So I love this. I could do this morning, noon, and night, because these are the kind of conversations that are going to transform our systems. And I think it was Raphael that said we need much more of these conversations in public. That's why I pushed to have this work session today, because we do. We need a lot more of these in public, and we need a lot more people actually playing their role in fixing this system. So I really appreciate everybody coming today, and I thank you all for this dialogue, because this is absolutely critical so that we know where we're headed and why. And I'll stop. I know Abby wants to say something.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Ryan, for your yes and both and. That those are the spaces I also occupy. And I think part of the real challenge in acknowledging the crisis that we're all steeped in is that if we want to be good firefighters, you just go to one fire at a time. But if you want to really deal with fire maintenance and fire prevention, you also have to set aside the time to plan. And I'm a clinical social worker by training. And so I understand how hard it is to make the human brain think about long-term visionary stuff when you got the crisis right in front of you. So yes, and we have to do better. And when we think about the economic model of the criminal legal system and how expensive it costs, and what that return on investment is, that's a really great way to really expand the knowledge base of why transformation is critical, how much housing we could fund, how many different innovative services and treatment and placements we could fund if we had less commitment. Because the criminal legal system is shrinking in terms of people, but the budgets aren't shrinking, right? So there's lots of vacancies. So if we could figure out how to do some, as our lead strategist coined, budget alchemy, and really fund those missing alternatives that we really need, I really feel like change is possible, and to lean in and just to know that we really can possibly do it.
Abby, I almost forgot my train of thought because I liked everything you just said. Is when you go into implementation, will you be engaging police officers, fire people on the streets, like people on the ground doing the work? Any way you can figure out how to bring them into the study and into the implementation, because too often we're up in the clouds for the reality of the people working on the ground. And I just learned through trial and error that no culture change takes place unless you include those people on the ground that are actually facing these challenges every day. And so I just love the day when a clinical social worker is sitting next to the police officer, next to the person in fire, next to the person from Portland Street Response, next to the person that works at a rehab center, and really get the wisdom from them. So I'm sure you're already thinking about that, but
I should summarize with this. I see Stephanie's hand. Good to see you. The implementation is still to be developed. We have a contract for a vision, and then the implementation, that's our next hurdle. And just as a reminder, all of those voices were uplifted through discovery. Lots of interviews and focus groups with PSR, BHU, Portland Street Response, Behavioral Health Unit, Abby, stop with the acronyms, right? And all of those critical voices that we really wanted integrated. And in one of the preliminary conversations we had, it was when Deputy Chief Davis was still here. He said, but Abby, we've got the Behavioral Health Unit and it's so great. I'm like, yeah, Chris, BHU is awesome. But imagine a world where you didn't have to do that because people received the supports they needed in the community. We didn't have to build out a police-led response. Right.
Stephanie Howard.
Thanks. I just wanted to make one brief comment and sort of build on a couple of the other things. One thing that I think we've kind of come to through the discussion is that for a lot of us, we live in this public safety world. We know the language, we know what different acronyms mean. We know that when we're talking about recidivism, what we're talking about is no return customers, right? But a lot of average community members do not understand that. And so I think that one way that this could be sort of enhanced for a lot of people who don't live in this world is to help really connect the dots. And then when we say this, that ends up with this. Here's the result or the benefit. So for example, when we have, behavioral health professionals separate from the police department, we have those resources available to address people on the street having a mental health crisis, and we don't need to call police. That means the response time on a 911 call goes down because now there are law enforcement officers who can respond to violent crimes where they are the correct response. So I know those conversations happen in lots of different places, but it feels to me like this presentation and this lane is a great way to illustrate how when we're talking about shrinking, the criminal legal system, what we're really talking about is focusing resources in ways that let the trained people do what they're trained to do and to be more efficient and to be more effective. And I think that kind of can get lost when we're talking to each other in this world of community safety, that we all kind of know that, but we need to make sure that that's articulated for, our average citizen who is concerned with all of the things that have been raised here. That's just my observation.
Thanks. And I'll just jump in with my comment before I get back to facilitating. But I just want to say, as a former community practitioner on the community side, this conversation has been a long time coming. Community has been asking for this for decades. And I think from my perspective, I actually see it a little bit differently, probably because of my experience in community, in that, to me, this actually makes this actually gets at the problems where we actually would have more tools and resources. We'd address root causes. So it actually would solve present kinds of crises that we have now if we have this expanded thinking and holistic approach. So to me, it's exciting. And we are dealing with current crises, but we have to address systemic failure. This pandemic was a stress test for those systems, and we are failing. And so there's no better time than to create that North Star and that vision for the future than right now, while we have worst case scenarios happening. That's actually a rare opportunity to really define and crystallize how deep we need to go. The other thing I want to say is that we have in some ways been testing out what this smaller footprint means. To me, smaller footprint doesn't, again, to the conversation here, doesn't mean like the literal bodies to me. It really literally means the handoffs to other roles that you see, the network and wraparound supports for those incidents that are happening. And for me, just something that to my colleagues, and I can appreciate you're grappling with what this might look like in terms of operationalizing this, is the CHIVE program. When I was at Latino Network, that's an excellent example. Then it felt like a very new, innovative idea, a very big departure where DCJ shrank their part of the work and then gave up that part to the community. And guess what happened? Less recidivism happened. And then you had a stronger partnership. You had the community doing their role, which was effective and inspirational and destigmatized people that were system impacted. And then you had, a better understanding by people working on the justice side of just all like the power of community and the ability to treat the person rather than the incident. And so anyway, I just want to say this is a really good discussion, but we need to be pushing ourselves to be thinking a little bit outside of our normal lenses, because this is a real opportunity. The last thing I'll just mention, at the front end of this, there was so much detail and attention and work put into gathering people's ideas and opinions and thoughts, and it was from multiple stakeholders. And I feel like this presentation didn't pull that part out. So I just wanted to ask that question to you, Abby, in the group, because I do hear Commissioner Ryan's question in there. And I have to tell you, Commissioner Ryan, there was a tremendous, efforts and different kinds of stakeholders involved. But I would love to see if there's a way that we can share those great lists of stakeholders with council so that we can see it.
I will put it all in the chat before we close, because it's all in the website, just wanting to be incredibly transparent and make sure that we uplift the voices of folks who are asking for change. Great. I'll do that right now. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Let me see my script. Okay. Thank you, presenters, and thank you, colleagues. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
I just want to, just before we end, just give my absolute thanks and appreciation to Raphael, Babak, and Abby, and Chair Kafori. It's been a wonderful experience working with all of you, and I really appreciate you taking time to be with us this morning. Thank you so much, President Rubio. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any closing comments from Abby or the panel? Yeah.
Just thank you. Doing our jobs.
Thank you so much for that.
Blessings, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a really, really important and great presentation. It was a really good discussion, a lot of good questions, and onward with the work. So thanks, everyone, and we're adjourned.